Hey everybody, it's Safi and Marco Dish Out on Movies, the only movie review show on YouTube to review movies in terms of food. It's just Marco here once again, and I am glad that I sound better than yesterday because I think that, I don't know, it's just you guys have noticed too the fact that this whole year I've just been sick every month in one way or another. It's getting to be a little exhausting. Like every single month there's like a new thing. It's like it's really pretty. I don't know. I At the end of 2023 it'll definitely be mentioned in the top 10 best and worst moments videos. So I think though that it might just be because of my room gets really cold at night that I kind of sound stuffy and stuffed up. It's cold at night, and so I can either turn on the heater and leave it on all night and risk being overheated, and so then I'll have to get up and turn it off, or I can leave it off and risk being cold, wake up, and then have to turn it on and go back to sleep. So there really is no winning, and, the reason why it's so cold, I think you guys know the reason why. And so it's a lot more of a unique situation than I guess normally people what they experience. Or it might just be post-COVID, I don't know. I have no idea. It's like ugh. But anyways, I'm doing a lot better too. Every day I'm getting a little bit better now that I have antibiotics. So I am here to do Sharon's Beverly Hillbillies episodes, here to analyze them, here to review them, here to talk about the occult significance underneath each and every episode. And surprisingly, this was like a buffet of occult stuff. It was like a buffet of obvious, right in your face things that they showed and talked about. It was so bad to the point of where my jaw would drop, and I would just be sitting there like, what the fuck? Like not like in like, wow, this is like the most incredible thing I've seen so far, but just kind of like amazed the fact that nobody even talks about this stuff. I mean, nobody has even mentioned these things. Nobody has even analyzed her films and TV show episodes to talk about any of this stuff. Because it's like either they're scared to, or they write everything off as, oh, that's a coincidence. Oh, that's a coincidence. It's like, not in Hollywood, okay? Not in this situation. I mean, you can they even admit to it in plain sight. Like, you remember that Man from U.N.C.L.E. episode where she's in the episode and that other girl is there and they're like competing to see who's gonna get the bigger spotlight. That's like right out there in the open. They admit to it openly and honestly. But because this other stuff is a little bit more hush-hush, you guys just aren't going to believe that ever. Like, it's just kind of ridiculous. So let's get started on talking about these episodes, because we got a lot to discuss. Okay, I will talk about the show as well at the end of this, because my opinion on the show kind of changed a little bit too, unfortunately. But we will talk about that. You guys will see what I mean. So her first episode was season 2, episode blank. I can't remember the episode number, but it was called Ellie Starts to School. I give this episode like a C- or a D+. There's a hilarious part where you can see a car in the background stop when the driver is directed to. So you have these two girls and they're talking in the foreground, and then in the background you see this car and it's about to drive onto the set, and all of a sudden it stops, and then he backs up for like 5 whole minutes, and then he turns into another place, and then he backs up, and then he turns around and leaves. And I thought that was probably the funniest thing of this whole episode, because it's so real and so funny that you can see that in the background. I mean, it's just so blatantly obvious. There's this guy, he's just randomly driving down this road, and all of a sudden it's like, uh-oh, I gotta turn around. This guard is waving at me to turn my car around. I thought that was actually the funnier than anything that happened the whole episode. So the episode's all about Ellie Mae, and it's a really stupid story where she's supposed to go to school at this girls' finishing school, and of course she does not go here at all. I think it's called like the Willow Finishing School or something. I can't remember. She does not end up going here, but she ends up kind of befriending, quote unquote, this rich girl, Cynthia Fenwick. She's her and her mom are very significant characters in Sharon's episode grouping. And the whole episode is about how they misunderstand the Fenwick family. They think that they're poor. They think that they don't have any clothes or any food or anything. But this episode is all about sacrifice. The Clampetts give up their clothes and furniture to the Fenwicks when they think that they don't have anything. So what happens is Jeg gives this speech, and it's a speech that is all about how everyone should sacrifice everything for everyone, and sacrifice is amazing. And they proceed to, first they give them some clothes that they put together themselves, but then Mrs. Drysdale comes over, and they take like almost all the furniture out of their house, and they load it up to give it to the Fenwick family. And I thought this was really creepy. I mean, it obviously was all in comedy and comedic fun. It was in light humor, but you can tell what is going on underneath the surface. You can tell the intention of this, the fact that this is her first episode. You don't usually have these episodes in this series where the main character, he turns to the camera, he gives a speech about sacrificing, and then all of a sudden everyone is sacrificing everything. They're giving everything to the Fenwick family, even though they don't need it. It's just so weird. It is very weird. That's why I say this episode's a piece of shit. Because it doesn't even feel like a good episode story or a good episode plot of what ends up happening, like in terms of comedy, character, conclusion. It's a mess, and it seems like the whole purpose of the episode is just to do what's underneath the surface. And this is oftentimes what happens with these, even nowadays when you see these agenda movies and TV shows, what's the common theme? Well, they're all trash. And the reason why is because they're more concerned about what's going on beneath the surface than what's going on the surface. And so they, pay more attention to quotas and putting in agenda dialogue. And so therefore that results in terrible product. And back then, the same type of thing would happen. You'd have a Leave It to Beaver episode. It would be all about how skipping school is bad because, it's bad. And as a result, it's a trash episode because it's not about telling a good story. It's about achieving whatever messaging or whatever code they want to put in these episodes. I mean, these episodes are... so what... Another thing... So it took me a while to actually see who Sharon was in this episode. but they have her in this outfit where she looks exactly like the main character from Breakfast at Tiffany's. And of course, you know that the character in Breakfast at Tiffany's is like a high-level escort. And that's not to say that she is. It's just to say that this is the character archetype that they're having her emulate with this wardrobe. And her character's name is Mary. And we all know the symbolism of the name Mary. Only time that she's ever Mary on the show is her first episode. It's important to recognize the symbolism here. It means that she's available now to be cast and put in everything and anything. The other two characters standing beside her are meaningless, or are they? The other character in the middle just so happens to be named Sharon as a character. So the order is Mary, Sharon, and Cynthia. And guess which movie Cynthia, the actress who plays Cynthia Fenwick, guess which movie she's going to appear in? The next movie in the process of this investigation, year-long investigation, Don't Make Waves. So that's pretty significant. I mean, it's almost like they're saying, 1, 2, 3. It was brought to... Okay, so now I'm going to move on to a Mr. Ed episode as a surprise. Although this one was kind of like, It was brought to my attention Granny and Mr. Drysdale are in a Mr. Ed episode called Love and the Single Horse. It's important to note that this episode premiered on Jay Sebring's birthday. It also premiered 3 days before her second-to-last episode on Beverly Hillbillies. There's a scene where Wilbur reads Mr. Ed's memoir underneath an Architect Gazette. This is symbolic for what these movies and TV shows really do. On the surface, they show you one thing. Underneath, it's something completely different. Breakfast at Tiffany's... Wait a second. Why would I put that? Okay, I guess that was an error. That was a false note that I was just going to note that Breakfast at Tiffany's premiered 4 days before Jay's birthday. But I would like to also point out that the actor who plays Jed in Beverly Hillbillies was also in Breakfast at Tiffany's. And then there's another very significant line that I would like to point out that kind of tells you what these people think about you, the audience. In regards to, they probably never would have believed that somebody like me would do a video like this. Well, they say in the episode, people buy books, but they don't read them. And what does that tell you? There's more Native American symbolism in this episode, like with Sharon's Columbus Day episode. There's this whole segment where the main guy, Wilbur, he goes to this museum, and Mr. Ed is inside this Native American exhibit, and he's trying to get him to come home, and so he dresses up like the Native American, and Granny comes in and she complains, and she makes all a fuss about what's going on, and it's really, really funny. And it was a mediocre episode, though. I mean, it really wasn't even worth watching, to be frank. Next episode is called Jethro's First Love. Sharon is now Janet, and she has black hair. At the same time, there's a character named Chickadee with the same poofy blonde hair wig that she had as the character Mary in the previous episode. So they took that wig and they gave it to this other character named Chickadee, And, those two characters are the most prominent in this episode. Miss Hathaway takes Janet to go have a talk with her in the pool. Now, obviously, think of the pool scene in the Man from U.N.C.L.E. episode. I mean, it's a very odd thing to just say out of all of a sudden, like, I'm going to go have a talk with this person in the pool. It's meant to be a joke, but it's just pretty interesting, all these little tidbits that they kind of add in here that relate to her other episodes, her other movies, her other, everything. It's like, what an interesting choice of words. And then she clarifies and she says it's the secretarial pool. I don't know, there's just something off about that line. It seems like even for Miss Hathaway, would she really say something like that? Like, would she really mistake that her office building has a pool? I think that's a bunch of bullshit. So that was a out of character line. I give this episode a C- as well. I thought it was a piece of trash. The character Chickadee has a story where she just hatched from an egg. Now, she has this whole dance act that she puts on where she apparently gets inside of an egg and hatches out of it to do her dance. And then she, I guess that takes off her clothes and, wiggles around so that guys like Mr. Drysdale can look at her. But this is a symbol to symbolize that Sharon just hatched as a new star. Keep in mind, Chickadee is never in the show again after these 2 episodes. This episode is a 2-parter, so I bet the sacrifice will be in the next episode, Chickadee Returns. So this is a old 2-parter, and the second part I would give a B+, though. I think it was pretty good. Now I am thinking that the first episode will be the only one dealing with sacrifice, supposedly. In this episode, Sharon's look has changed once again. Now she wears a gray shirt with a long-sleeve gray top. She's actually the first person to get undressed by the raccoon in this episode, not the stripper. So this episode is all built around how Chickadee took Ellie Mae's raccoon, and she's going to be performing an act where the raccoon pulls off her clothes. But Sharon is the first one who has to deal with this raccoon. She's the first person who actually has her clothes tampered with by this raccoon. Chronologically in this episode, I guess you could say, well, Chickadee had her clothes taken off in between episodes. It's like, yeah, I'm not concerned with what happens in between the episodes. I'm concerned with what's happening inside the episodes and what they're choosing to emphasize and what they're choosing to tell you. Miss Hathaway takes the raccoon from Chickadee so she can give it back to Ellie Mae. It is now trained to pull off clothes. So for some reason, Miss Hathaway, once again, they're kind of treating Miss Hathaway like she's an idiot, which is weird because her character is probably the smartest character in the whole show, which that might be a hot take, but I do think that she is very smart and reasonable, and she's actually a lot better than I thought she was going to be based on the first episode of the series. So for some reason, this raccoon, it's running rampant in the office, and it tries to undress Janet, aka Sharon. I'm just going to call her Janet from now on. The rest of the episode deals with Chickadee going over to the Clampett's mansion to do a strip show. What strikes me about her is she's fake in every way. She has fake food in a fake basket, a fake persona of being Little Miss Riding Hood, a fake understanding of the situation, because she is a decoy in this episode. She's an expendable character they get rid of at the end and is never seen again in the whole show. And keep in mind, Sharon didn't even have to be in this episode. Yes, it was a very funny joke to have the secretary run out and be like, "That raccoon was trying to undress me." But then you think about the logistics of this. Why would Miss Hathaway let a raccoon run around the office building? And it cost extra money just to have this actress come in and run in and do that one line. Why take the time to come up with a completely new wardrobe for her for such a short scene? You could have just had her wear the same thing that she wore last episode. This is a pretty good, and by the way, they end up doing that for like almost all the rest of her episodes. I mean, she's always wearing this like dark dress with pearls, and then she's got the dark wavy hair. They hardly ever give her anything else to wear, so that's why I'm saying, why take the time to come up with this completely new wardrobe for such a short and kind of meaningless scene? I mean, it is probably the funniest joke of the episode, but that's just because of her line delivery was very, very good, in my opinion. It is a pretty good and funny episode. The villain in this episode, if you think about it, is someone who is not willing to sacrifice. They talk about how she's going to have to do housewife things and how they're going to have to sacrifice to teach her what to do. But at the end of the episode, she reveals she's not willing to sacrifice her normal life, even if it means the Clampett's fortune. And other members of the family are willing to sacrifice to help her become a good housewife, like Ellie Mae, Granny, everyone. Everyone in the episode is willing to sacrifice except for her. And so therefore she is painted as the villain. She's painted as someone who's selfish and fake and phony and ditzy, and she's a bimbo and everything. In fact, she's kind of pretending that she's interested in them just so that she can, keep on adding up all the hours to charge them money. So I actually liked this episode. It was pretty good. I was kind of worried, though, because those first two episodes were such trash. I did not like them very much. The Clampetts are overdrawn. I give that a B-. And now she's dressed in what she had before. She has one scene in the whole episode. A showcase scene where she looks forward to Jethro coming to visit to the bank, and Miss Hathaway looks her over. Then she forces her to work in the main office so Jethro speaks with her instead of Janet. What's interesting about this scene is how it's blatantly obvious that the whole point of this scene is just to advertise this actress. It's as if her character and scene is completely unrelated to the rest of the episode and is put there as an add-on. So to me, it's becoming clear that her role on the show is similar to advertising a product in a magazine. The rest of the episode is pretty funny but frustrating, and the reason why it's frustrating is because they make this whole mistake where these losers, I guess you could say, they get a statement saying that they're millionaires because they're Clampetts, and then the real, the main characters, they get a thing from the bank saying that they have overdrawn. And so it's frustrating that there's this big misunderstanding. Next up is The Clampetts Go Hollywood. This I would give a B+. Is the second part of this two-parter. This was a pretty good but frustrating episode. You kind of felt bad for the poor couple last episode because it seemed like, they're struggling, But But in this episode, they are evil. I mean, these are some really nasty villains. I mean, it was hard to watch this episode because of these villains. They were so heartless and evil, and they were just the worst people. But the main point here is how Sharon is credited in the episode even though she's not even in it. She's not credited in the entire season, if that's what you're thinking. Like, a lot of the times you'll have a show and they'll add a supporting character and they'll be credited even if they're not in every episode. No, that's not what it is at all. That's not what happens with her. So I don't know why she was credited in this episode. But let's examine why she was possibly credited. In her first episode, there were many references to Jackie Kennedy. I wrote them off because she was the fashion it person of that time period. And she had really good fashion, by the way. Like, I would... However, the Clampetts Go Hollywood episode was aired November 20th, 1963, days before his assassination. There is something there to why they credited her in this episode in correlation to that event. In fact, and just in terms of their messaging, not in terms of people. In fact, I think one would have to completely re-examine these episodes in reference to the JFK assassination. Now that I think about the scene where they come up on the girls in the front of the school and Ellie Mae starts to school, this whole scene it brings some very clear pictures in mind. So in that scene you have these characters, they're standing, and then Miss Hathaway, she's behind a bush, Ellie Mae's behind the bush. You guys get what I mean. If you think about the assassination, you can draw your own conclusions. I'm not gonna just go right out and say it. I don't need to. I mean, it's right there. I mean, I don't have to say anything. I just all I have to do is have to suggest it, and then you guys will be like, oh yeah, he's right. But this episode is also significant to Sharon and other actors of that time. The way these people change and become completely different. They're almost like robots. In terms of, and by the way, what I mean is the Clampetts, they all go Hollywood and become like shells of themselves. And it's like they have become completely different people to where it's creepy. It's kind of creepy and kind of like, Manchurian Candidate level creepy. In terms of sacrificing, the villains in this episode are once again people who refuse to sacrifice. They are repeatedly given the option to do chores because other members of the family are too busy doing movie star things, but they refuse to do these chores. So, for instance, they tell Jethro to go to the movies and see a Marlon Brando movie. I think it's called The Wild Bunch. I can't remember. And they're like, oh, well, since Jethro's gone, nobody's here to cut up the wood. Would you like to do that? And then guess what? No. The villains in this episode, they're like, no thanks. Bye-bye. I got other stuff to do because I'm a Hollywood person. So that's sort of like the running theme the whole episode is that these guys, even though they're bad, they have the option so many times to just, do something decent, do a chore, do this, do that, but they don't do it. Because they're selfish and evil. They don't like sacrificing like the Clampetts do. Now, the garden party is the next episode. I give this episode a fucking A+. I thought that this was a masterpiece of an episode. It was a great episode in terms of like all the ones that I've seen in the whole series. What's the episode they do right after the JFK assassination, though? Well, it's one where there's a big party. Need I say more? I mean, that's pretty bad. Like, they're having a big party, and that's the episode that they choose to air right after the JFK assassination happens. It's like they're just so, they're happy, I guess. I mean, they're happy. They're not gonna, be like, oh, maybe this is in bad taste and we should switch out episodes, or maybe air the last episode again is out of respect. Oh no, we're gonna air an episode where they throw a big party. I mean, come on. I mean, this is a great and fun episode, though. It actually takes the piss out of The Office's crappy garden party episode, which, if you guys want to know something, The Office, one of the worst episodes of the whole series, is the garden party episode where Dwight is helping Andy throw this boring garden party, and Jim sells this fake book, How to Throw a Garden Party. And it's supposed to be really funny that, like, they do these things like they dance and stuff. Like, it's really, really weird. And it's so, like, dry and unfunny and just piss poor. This episode destroys that episode because the whole episode is about how stupid garden parties are. I mean, I've never even heard of having a good garden party. Like, has anyone ever had a good garden party that doesn't involve marijuana? I mean, that's the only type of garden party that I think that people would enjoy nowadays. Like, does anyone even throw a garden party anymore? Let's look up. God, the chair sounds terrible. Let's look up garden parties near me. Let's look up. Let's see what's happening. Are there any things happening? I don't understand. They have party venues, but are there? Well, probably won't be able to find any. I don't understand. I want to see a garden party going on. Let's look up on YouTube. Let's look up. Are there any garden parties 2022 even? Yeah. The only fucking losers who are still throwing garden parties are the fucking royal family. Yeah, that's pretty on par with them. I mean, like, normal people, though, like Mary Jane across the street. Mary Jane across the street is not throwing a garden party because they fucking suck, and you know it. The Clampetts create their own party, and all the guests from Mrs. Drysdale party go to theirs instead. And I loved it. I thought it was so fun. Everyone is having a good time at the end. They're not at this stuffy, boring garden party, Mrs. Drysdale. The notable thing here is where they put Sharon. She is a nameless party guest who dances with Jethro. In relation to those two other episodes, we know she had to be in this one in some way or another due to the other two episodes and their significance to you-know-what. In terms of sacrifice, the Clampetts have to go to the party and play along at first. They have to sacrifice the clothes they normally wear, their behavior, what they typically do at parties, wrestling, all that stuff, fighting, dancing. They have to sacrifice all this stuff just so that they can be accepted into this party at first. And then they're like, fuck that. We don't fucking care about this fucking boring garden party, and Ellie Mae is not allowed to bring the raccoon. But then the sacrifice pays off for them, because then they start their own party and become the party. So the whole point of this is, even though they end up throwing their own party, and, on the surface, it's like, oh, look, they created the fun party. Mrs. Drysdale had the shitty party. Underneath the surface, they did that sacrifice, and then the sacrifice paid off. So next up is Ellie Needs a Ma. I give this a B+. This is a pretty good episode. It's pretty funny. It redeems Cynthia Fenwick's mom as a funny character. The whole episode is about how Jed thinks that Ellie Mae needs a mother, so he's gonna... Mr. Drysdale tries hooking him up with Cynthia Fenwick's mom. And it's just really funny because that actress, she was the principal from Leave It to Beaver. What the fuck was that principal's name? I can't remember at the moment, but she did a really good job in this episode. What's interesting, and you guys are going to get sick and tired of me talking about sacrifice, that this is another sacrifice-themed episode. The running theme being Mrs. Fenwick is not willing to sacrifice. She is willing to give this bank her shitty housing development idea, but not willing to put up any money of her own. Just the equipment and construction crews. She's not willing to give money to make the development, though. She gives the Clampetts a small dog they mistake for a dowry. They comment on how such a little dowry it is, meaning a little sacrifice. Then she wants Mr. Clampett to give her and by the way, by sacrifice, they were planning on eating this dog. And they talk about plumping it up because they were planning on eating this dog. And that is very apparent in the episode. It's not like, even though Ellie Mae is a huge animal person, the first thing that they talk about when they're given the animal is it's very small, we're going to have to plump it up. Then she wants Mr. Clampett to give her $10 million for the housing development idea. He thinks that she's talking about marriage. Then she thinks he wants her to marry him in exchange for the money. And so this makes her go, I am actually not willing to do anything for money. Bye. I thought that was really hilarious. But the message is, of course, she's not willing to sacrifice and marry him for that money. Thus, she is the villain of the episode. And keep in mind, the people who are painted as villains are always the people who are not willing to sacrifice. The Clampetts Get Culture is the next one. I give it a C+. This is kind of trash. In this one, the Clampetts are ready to feud with the bank at first. Jethro picks up Janet, aka Sharon, and says, she's one of the hostages. We need to tie her up. Then Ellie Mae comes in with the tailor and says that she has a hostage and he needs to be tied up too. This whole mediocre episode revolves around the Clampetts getting culture via playing bridge and going to a country club. Both scenarios are guaranteed laughs, but are rushed through with the funniest jokes being them talking about them after they happened off screen. Both Drysdales sacrificed their days to help out. It is interesting how many episodes in Season 2 revolve around sacrifice in general. In the first season, it was usually the Clampetts getting into sticky situations, misunderstanding them, and then the people at the bank sometimes getting them out of it. In Season 2, almost every episode revolves around a villainous character Who doesn't want to sacrifice? But the Clampetts do, or the Drysdales. My favorite part of the episode is when they all come into the mansion at the end and sing Merry Christmas to the audience. I thought that was really nice. And this episode aired I think a day before my birthday, December 18th, I believe. So next up is the Giant Jackrabbit. This is the episode that people consider the best episode of the series, or one of the best episodes. I would give it an A. It's a very significant episode, that's for sure. The main plot is about getting some meat to cook for the week. Granny continuously sees an escaped kangaroo hopping around, thinking it's a giant jackrabbit. Jed thinks she's just drinking and hallucinating. There's never a confirmation for her that she indeed did see this animal. The subplot is where the messaging is, and this is something that they do as well. They'll have the main plot, it's a simple plot, it can be very good or just okay, but then they'll have the side plot, and the side plot is where they hide everything, like, here's a cupcake, but there's a pill inside the cupcake. You know what I mean? Like, that's what they do. There is a woman working at a catering company, and she's very rude to the Clampetts on the phone. So Mr. Drysdale orders her to go to their mansion in person and apologize to them and gift them a truckload of free food, a sacrificial offering that replaces the meat that they need to get to cook for the week. But then we see another sacrificial offering in the bank. Miss Hathaway wants Jethro to kiss her. Then Janet walks in, and Jethro picks her up and kisses her because she's the first woman who walked into the room. And yeah, that was another sacrifice. When the woman arrives at the house from the catering company with the catering goods, I thought to myself, I bet this actress is significant to Sharon. What do you know? It's Kathy Kirsch, the woman she was in friendly competition with to become the it person from the Man from U.N.C.L.E. episode. She is introduced as a new character named Marion Billington. It seems as though she is another metaphorical sacrifice here, as in she is in 3 more episodes in the season, while Sharon is not in any more until season 3. So of course they make sure to do the same magazine picture advertising, focusing in on her. Now let's go to season 3. And by the way, for some reason, Amazon and Tubi, whatever, they don't have seasons 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or I think 9. I can't remember if they just did 8 or 9 seasons. They do not have any of these seasons available for streaming. So I just had to look up the episodes on YouTube and Dailymotion, which is unfortunate. It's like, I don't understand. Why don't they want the free money? Like, it's the same thing with Mayberry RFD. That show, they only have the first season, and I paid for the whole season like 2 years ago or 3 years ago. But then with season 2 and 3, I gotta watch all those episodes for free on Dailymotion because I guess they just don't like free money. Next up is back to Marineland. I give this episode a B-. It's kind of irritating because it implies after Jethro is in his late 20s They don't know how much of a big eater he is. This is stupid. I mean, they've lived with them ever since whenever. They know what he's like. They know that he has a big appetite. So what's the deal with pretending like all of a sudden he's a really big eater? I don't buy it. The scene with Jethro pretending to be a spy is comedy gold. Him going to work at Marineland obviously draws attention to Sharon's Columbus Day Mr. Ed episode with the sea theme. Most curiously, I don't know what's going on in the background. You guys know. Most curiously, Sharon is not in this episode at all. She's credited in the ending credits as well as IMDb though. But she's not in a single scene in the whole episode. They did another purposeful credit. And it's not a deal where she's in the next handful of episodes. She's not in the show until 10 episodes later than this episode. So, yeah, this episode, she's credited for the episode. She's not even in the whole fucking episode. But then 10 episodes later, she is in that episode. I don't understand that. Like, can somebody fill me in? Like, is it just because she's in kind of like the sequel to this episode? Because that's the only thing that I could think of. And even then, it is weird because the episodes are so far spaced apart. I don't know. Another obvious thing to talk about is how Jethro is obsessed with being a spy after watching 007. A lot of actors in Hollywood are not really actors, they're intelligence agents. Dash Riprock, you cad, is the next episode. I give this episode an A+. This is a very funny and entertaining episode, finally, centered around Ellie Mae in a good way. I love the misunderstandings in this episode. A highlight scene is when Dash Riprock has to pretend he's in love with Miss Hathaway while Janet stands there in the background like WTF. This is also a sad episode for Miss Hathaway because she's under the illusion the whole episode that these movie stars are attracted to her. The sacrifice in the episode deals with the two main characters, Ellie Mae and Dash. Dash is forced to play along with Miss Hathaway until he can let her down easy. He does not want to do this, but he is forced to. Ellie Mae is forced to dress up and act like Miss Hathaway by the end of the episode, sacrificing her true personality and appearance for love. Next episode, I think that this might have been the best one that I watched out of these 15 plus episodes. Next one, Double Knot Jethro. I give it an A+. This was a masterpiece. This is a fantastic follow-up to Back to Marineland. The episode Sharon is not even in, even though she's credited. In this episode, Jethro wants to be a secret spy and has a spy car and gadgets and everything. It is hilarious. Especially the ending where Granny gets ejected out of the car. This was a highlight of the series. It was so funny. I watched it over and over and over again the first time I watched it. Also, Jethro's iron hats effects on him were funny. The whole plot about Banks doing a beauty contest is kind of thrown away at the end. The sacrifice? Janet has a broken leg. Mr. Drysdale desperately wants her to take off her cast and model in this beauty contest through the pain of having a broken leg. She does not want to do it, and it's unclear whether he is going to force her to or not, because there is never any follow-up to this where they show the beauty contest of the banking girls. Then Mr. Drysdale hires Ellie Mae, and that whole thing goes by the wayside. It's interesting in this episode how they use a girl's measurements as her secret spy number. So they'll call a girl 362336. And they kind of mistake that for a spy number. There's something to that detail. Another interesting detail is Mr. Drysdale's criticism of what Janet will do or not do for the beauty contest. Because she's like, the doctor says I gotta wear this for 3 fucking weeks, dipshit. And he's like, pioneer women fought Indians with broken legs. This country wouldn't have been made with broken legs. So that was another Columbus Day reference in connection to the sequel to the other episode with the Columbus Day reference. What is the deal with this Columbus Day / Native American symbolism and messaging? Another connection is the whole secret spy thing. Obviously, James Bond is a very popular character. It's not unusual to center a TV episode around James Bond, but it adds another layer to the episodes when you consider they're the ones that Sharon is in. The Clampetts versus Automation. I give this one a B+. It's a very good episode, a pretty good episode actually, it's not very good. It's similar to Andy Griffith episodes where there's a guy who needs help and Andy helps them out. The sacrifice is a huge one. The Clampetts are thinking of moving back home, and they decide not to because they want to stay and help Leroy Lester, the main character. They want him to stay in their mansion, and they want to feed him, give him anything he needs, until he can find a better place to live. They go out of their way to fix his car and feed him. There's a lot of number symbology in this episode. There's talk of a car payment being made for 46 years, but there's still 3 to go. 46 years, but there's still 3 to go. They say that over and over and over again. Of course, 4 plus 6 plus 3 equals 13. And Sharon is the one who says the 3, so there you go with that. This man worked at the bank for 47 years, 4 plus 7 equals 11. They keep on saying he worked for 47 years, 47 years, 47 years, over and over and over again. And at the beginning of the episode, there are a bunch of numbers mentioned in a sequence. And it's sort of, it's a piece of dialogue written in code. Because Jethro is talking about how we went to 27 houses. At only 14 of them, this happened. At 8 of them, this happened. And then 5 of them, this happened. And then 3 of them, there were 2 things that did this. And then in one, it was very purposeful. And so the number sequence was 27, 14, 8, 5, 3, 2, 1, 1. I am not sure of the meaning of these numbers, though, but it was very blatantly obvious. Next one is Possum Day. I give this one a B-. I turned off the color to watch these colored episodes. To me, the show looks a lot better in black and white. And wow. Wow. That's all I can say for this episode. Sorry about that. Mrs. Drysdale offers to take care of the Clampett mansion. It's a plot so that she can try to get rid of them. And guess what she does? She puts up 2 signs. For sale and sacrifice. Sacrifice with an exclamation point. I don't know how much more obvious they can get. I mean, I've been talking about this in all of her episodes, this theme, all of her movies, everything. And right here in an episode, like for some reason, you have a for sale sign, and then right above that sign, sacrifice. I mean, she ends up putting up more signs, but they showed her putting up this specific sign specifically, like this was emphasized. It was like this was the main point of doing this. So, Mr. Drysdale wants the Clampetts to stay in Beverly Hills, so he decides he will put on Possum Day somewhere himself. He goes to all these different city halls and tells them to sacrifice their annual celebrations for a new one. Possum Day. As in an episode, it's pretty bare and basic. It's the first part to a two-parter, so maybe the second part will be better. And by the way, in terms of their annual celebrations that they'd be sacrificing, instead of having the Rose Bowl, you guys should have Possum Day. That's the level of sacrifice that this guy is going around asking people to do. And so the second part, I would say this might have been the worst episode of the group of Sharon's episodes, and it's unfortunate because it's her last episode on this show. The Possum Parade, I give a C-. The tagline for this episode should be, the episode doesn't pay off, the sacrifice pays off. After being as deceitful as Mr. Drysdale was, the Clampetts decide at the last minute to pull out of the Possum Queen race and not even go to the Possum Parade and celebrate Possum Day. Mr. Drysdale, he went to every city from Beverly Hills into the middle of Mexico. He is driven to his breaking point before he comes home and decides to tell the Clampetts the truth, that there is no Possum Day in California. He lied to them because he's a selfish jackass. But he is the only one in the two-part episode who is rewarded. Yes, he is rewarded after doing all this shit. The Clampetts did not get to go home. They did not get to go to this special festival because he lied to them. But since he sacrificed by going to all these different city halls and asking them to have a Possum Day, he's off the hook. This is an unfortunate episode because it's her last one, and it doesn't even feel that way either. I don't know why they didn't bring her back again. She was a reoccurring character at this point who seemed important to the cast to bring back once in a while. To be honest, this episode has a lot of hilarious gags, regardless of it being a disappointment. They should have had a Possum Day somewhere, though. They could have thrown a Possum Day on the lawn of one of their rich people properties and rigged the event, too. All employees show up and get a small bonus or something. Like, that's what they could do. The last thing to mention is the wardrobe. Sharon's wardrobe is in this episode is a red dress. Before she walks in on set, Mr. Drysdale says, "Those signs at the Clampett mansion are a mistake. The sign saying sacrifice is a mistake." And then what happens? Sharon walks into the office. The message being, the Clampett's mansion is not being sold, but this actress is going to be sacrificed and sold. And so that's her that's pretty definitive. I mean, that's pretty much like, that's pretty bad. I mean, the timing of that is really you know, I mean, I don't even have to say anything. I don't even have to say anything for you guys to just be like, oh, you know, it's pretty weird. Like, even if it wasn't intentional, by the way, even if they didn't put this stuff there on purpose to send signals, to send messages, it would be a pretty weird coincidence to have a scene. One of her last scenes on this show is a scene where earlier in the episode they show for sale and sacrifice. And Mr. Drysdale's on the phone alone in his office saying these signs are a mistake. And then the next thing you know, somebody walks in who is a couple of years later brutally murdered for no reason. I mean, that's pretty weird. Overall, I think that Beverly Hillbillies is a mixed bag of a series. Not the first season, but the series. The first season is a near-perfect show, even with its small continuity and story structure flaws. The second, third, and fourth seasons seem like the show got more mainstream. From what I read, they cared less about story progression and more about simply going through the motions of comedic skits. And that's fine for a comedy show, but they could have at least had things happen, like Jethro getting together with Miss Hathaway, which apparently never happens, which I don't know why the fuck that wouldn't happen. That kind of pisses me off. That stuff pisses me off. Or, what I think is the biggest sin of the whole series, Mr. Brewster not getting together with Pearl. That was a no-brainer to me. Unfortunately, I do think that now the character Jethro is the worst one of the family. He's just like really selfish and full of himself. But it's all for a joke. You know, like they sacrificed his character just to make sure that, you know, he'll be a funny character. You know, like in season 1, he had kind of like a naivete, as people have said. He had this kind of like dumb young guy from the hills persona, but in seasons 2, 3, and 4, he's kind of like a jackass. Like he's really, really like full of himself, and I really did not like his character. Ellie Mae, her character is basically the animal wrangler girl. But Jed and Granny remain really strong as characters. I just might continue watching the show. If you guys would like me to. If you wouldn't like me to. I would like to know, because I like watching the show. You know, I mean, even though we have a lot of other stuff to do, I guess I could finish the series, possibly. And also, apparently, Beavis and Butthead Reboot Season 2 is coming out April 20th. I might review it, so just for fun. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the episode that I wanted to talk about in regards to Season 1. The episode called The Great Feud. This episode starts off with the Clampetts coming to confront Sonny and his parents, but they are out of town. Mr. Drysdale is at the bank. Jeg goes to the bank with his gun and gets arrested. Now, let's first start off. Let's talk about who was out of town in regards to you-know-who. And let's talk about, was there somebody before the events involving you-know-who arrested for something else, and then supposedly this crime was supposed to cover up and get that other person out of jail? Let's just discuss that, because this prompts them to go back to the Drysdale house. They shoot down 2 telephone wires. The wires are then placed on a light on the house by the maid together. And so the wires, it's a weird little shot, like why they needed to include this extended sequence where the maid takes these 2 wires, carefully places them on this light. I think it's purposeful in some way. The Clampetts take the butler away as a hostage. They tie him up. Mr. Drysdale and Miss Hathaway get Jed out of jail and want to take him home. But they have to go to their house instead with him due to being shot at. It's important, to note that the maid in this episode is named Marie, which is Sharon's middle name in real life. This is the maid's last episode. She has a very similar haircut to Janet. Jethro has a similar infatuation with her, like with Janet. There's a complicated back and forth, which leads to 4 opposing players at the Drysdale house: Mr. Drysdale, Miss Hathaway, Marie the maid, and Ravenswood the butler. This episode is caked in stuff that's underneath the surface. I don't really want to get into it because I think it's pretty obvious. I just told you everything, and so just, think about it and then, whatever. But I will say, that episode definitely is just as important as all the episodes that she was credited as being in. So, I will say that. And so I guess that'll be it for this month. Next month I will be reviewing the movie Don't Make Waves, which is going to be I heard it's a bad movie. I heard that even she doesn't like it herself, so that's pretty bad. So anyways, please like this video, comment, tell me what you think the most shocking thing was, and tell me if there was anything that you think you would disagree with. I don't really care, because I'm not stating it's fact. I'm just stating that this is my opinion based on having just watched these episodes. You could just see these things were, right out in the open that they were doing, and it's all I'm doing is just pointing them out. And then please subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more honest videos like this. Goodbye, everybody. See you soon.